Hey everyone, it's Kyle. Today I'm doing a GameCube controller teardown video. We're going to tear the whole controller apart and we're going to put it back together, so feel free to follow along. We're only going to cover the basic information on tools in this video, so if you'd like more in-depth information, my previous video goes into a lot more detail. I'll have that linked below, along with some links to tool recommendations. But the quick overview is this is a tri-point screwdriver. People call it the Triwing. You're probably going to find it labeled as a Triwing versus a tri-point. You need either a Y2.5 or a Y3. You're going to need a Phillips PH0 and a Phillips PH1. And if you need to take the stick box off, a Spudger will make this infinitely easier, but you can also use tweezers. You're going to want to grab the Triwing screwdriver, and there's 6 screws located in the back of the shell. They're all pretty visible, so let's go ahead and take those off. Now that we've got the screws taken out, you can just pull the back shell off. And forewarning, hold the controller face down, or else the buttons will come spilling right out. Always hold it like this when you're taking the controller apart and when you're reassembling it. We're gonna set this part aside for now, and we're going to take the triggers out. Go grab your PH1 screwdriver. And be very careful, these screws are very soft, they can strip very easily. So make sure you put a lot of pressure on there so you don't have any slips. Okay, now that the screws are taken out, you can pull the trigger guards off. And a note for when you're reassembling, this is the right trigger guard and it's got this indent right here. Left one does not have that. When you're pulling the trigger out, just pinch the assembly together and pull it out. And if you need to pull it apart, gently let the spring up. Same thing with L. Okay, that's everything with the back shell and the triggers. Let's move on to the board and the front shell. Now to get the cable out, I personally like to use one of my screwdrivers, specifically the Triwing, to just stick it in this little gap right here and pry it out. Makes it very easy. Pull the board out. We're gonna set the board aside for now, and let's take the buttons out. So you got your Z. So just pull the button pads off and let them fall into your hand. Be very careful because it's really easy to lose the damn start button. Falls in your carpet, you're gonna have a hell of a time looking for it. Okay, now we're at the board. So the sticks come right off the stick box. And in order to easily access the stick box screws, we're gonna take the rumble bracket off as well. The rumble wires are held in by this clip right here. Go ahead and unclip them. And then it should just come right off. And be very careful with the rumble motor wires. If you wiggle them around too much, it's gonna break. And if you don't have a soldering iron, then you're kind of shit out of luck there. I like to hold the rumble bracket off to the side here. And then you're going to grab your PH0 screwdriver. And there's 2 screws here for the analog stick and 2 screws here for the C stick. You can go ahead and unscrew those. And then in order to fully remove the stick box, you want to grab one of those Spudgers that I mentioned earlier. And you just jam it in between the potentiometer and the stick box, and you just pry them apart. And it comes right out. And that's everything disassembled. If you want to lubricate and clean your stick boxes, I'll have a guide written by Fires down in the description. It's a very worthwhile maintenance endeavor. Just make sure you don't use too much lubricant on an OEM controller board, or else the lubricant is going to ooze out of the stick box and it's going to get in the trigger potentiometer, and that's going to greatly reduce the lifespan of the potentiometer. So just, if you're going to lubricate your stick boxes, be aware of that. Okay, now let's reassemble this thing. So first, let's stick the stick boxes back in. I like to set them in and then clip them to the potentiometer. If you're having any issues clipping, make sure this middle part of the potentiometer is facing vertically, because that's what makes contact with the little peg coming out of the stick box. Oh, I'm having issues with this one because it is not lined up perfectly vertically. So you can use your finger, screwdriver, or the spudger to realign it. Okay, now it's vertical again. It should snap right in. Nope, slightly off. Also make sure these clips right here are lined up with the holes of the stick box. I slightly bent it when I was trying to put it back in. Now it snaps in. So grab your pH 0. You're going to want to be careful and make sure you thread the screw properly in the hole, or else it creates a new thread path and it will strip out the holes of your stick box. So give it a little screw. If it's easy, keep going. If it's hard, twist to the left, give it a few twists, and then try again, and just keep doing that until you line up the threads. Another thing to note is that you do not want to over torque these screws, or else your stick box will become harder to move and it'll get stuck in some positions. So once it's like reasonably tight, just stop. Don't try to really tighten it in there. Okay, next thing is the rumble bracket. There are gaps for the digital trigger pad wires. I like to slip the board through, push the wire through the gap. Do the same thing with this side. And then hold the rumble bracket forward like this. And snap it in to the 4 points. And then push the wires for the digital pad down. Then of course put the rumble motor back in. You want this metallic peg facing the front of the controller, or else you won't be able to close the shell. Make sure you tuck the wires back so they're not interfering with your trigger movements. And I like to make sure this wire is tucked under the C-stick board. We can reapply the sticks. It's a one-way fit, so just line it up and stick them on there. They just snap right back into place. Next, let's put the buttons back in. Again, they only fit in one way, so it's hard to mess this up. And make sure the button pads are lined up correctly. So there's a hole here that lines up with a egg coming out the shell. Again, and the start button's pretty easy. The D-pad is the one that's most likely to get unseated properly, so always double check that before you put the board back in. Go ahead and stick the board in. Clip the cable back to where it goes. And you can toss in the Z for now. It might fall out on you, so you might want to do it later. It's up to you. Let's reassemble the triggers. So on the tubes that mount the springs onto the trigger, you want the indent on the inside of the controller. So this one is for L. And this one's for R. So you're just going to pinch it back together. Put it in like this. Make sure to hold your thumb on the bottom so the spring doesn't fly apart. And then let it go into place. There are some plastic protuberances in the back shell for the trigger assembly to be mounted in. Same thing with L. you want to make sure these pegs are facing forward because this is what the trigger guards attach to hold everything in place. And before I do anything, I like to give them a quick little test to make sure the spring isn't having any weird movements. If it doesn't feel smooth to push the trigger, just go ahead and pull it out. Go ahead and rotate the spring a little bit. Put the trigger on, make sure the spring is lining up with the spots it's supposed to line up with inside the trigger. And I mean, mine's still smooth, but if you have issues, that's the way to fix it. And just keep doing that until it resolves itself. Next, put the trigger guards on. And screw them in with the PH1. Again, be very careful with these ones because they are the softest ones in the controller, and they're the ones that you're going to strip if you're going to strip a screw. So give them a good pressure. And again, if it's not threading correctly, go ahead and twist it to the left and then try again by tightening it until it feels like it's going in and not creating new threads. Give the triggers a test one more time to make sure everything feels good. If they're good, go ahead and grab your front shell. Again, holding it face down. Now, there's a couple of things you want to check before you start putting the shells back together. First, make sure the trigger potentiometers are up. A lot of the time during the assembly process, these will get pushed down. And then you've screwed the controller all the way together, only to notice the triggers don't work. You can't push them all the way down because these pegs are in the way. So make sure these are pushed up. Make sure Z is in its position. It's prone to falling out, so it's good to double check that. And make sure you align the rumble bracket properly so this metallic peg is facing towards the front of the controller. So when I put the shells back together, I like to do it from the top to the bottom. And it should just snap together pretty easily if you've put everything back into place properly. But before you screw it back together, I like to hold it and test to make sure everything feels right, because it's a real heartbreaker when you realize, oh, the D-pad button pad has been misaligned and I can't push the D-pad. And you have to pull everything back apart and unscrew it. It's a whole thing. And then put the 6 Triwing screws back into the shell. And yeah, you know where they're at. Pretty self-explanatory. And that's everything. You've successfully reassembled your controller. If you have any issues or questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. I will try to answer them as quickly as I can. And feel free to subscribe if you want to see more GameCube controller videos or just general retro gaming videos that I have planned in the future. Those will be coming out. So if you want to see them, subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you for watching.